Hey everyone, welcome to the open world Warcraft, where we're 100% focused on open world PvE content in World of Warcraft. Things like leveling, world quest, and delves. My name is Setsuko, and in this video, I want to take a look at the Death Knight class talent tree and just go through each of the talents and kind of give you some information on them, whether I think they're valuable or not when it comes to open world content, so that you have something to go off of if you have a question about creating a build of your own. So we're going to get into this, and we're going to start by taking a look at the starter talents for each of our different specializations here. So that's going to be Death Strike for Blood, and we're going to have Icebound Fortitude for Frost, and then we're going to have Raised Dead for our Unholy. Now, when it comes to these, they are, in my opinion, all mandatory due to things that they lead to. So that being said, we are going to touch on each one of these anyway, though. So starting with Icebound Fortitude, this is an ability with a 2-minute cooldown. It's a defensive. It gives you immunity to stuns and reduces all damage you take by 30%. It's just a nice, solid defensive ability that we have. That being said, there is defensive utility and damage reduction all throughout the class tree for Death Knight to an excessive amount, in my opinion. There's some stuff that I think you're better off skipping, and we'll get into talking about that. But Icebound Fortitude, nice 2-minute cooldown. It's something we can use to reduce that damage. So it's a solid ability, and because of the fact that it leads to things that we want, we're going to want to pick this up on every single specialization. Same thing goes for Death Strike. So Death Strike is going to be a melee ability that does damage and heals you for 1% of the damage that you deal. This is just really nice to have on all specializations to recover health. You may not use it as much on some specializations as you do on others, but again, because of things that it leads to, we're going to want to pick it up anyway. Then we also have Raised Dead. This is a 2-minute cooldown that will raise a minion to fight by your side. You can have a maximum of one of those out at a time, assuming you don't have anything from your specialization talent tree influencing that, and it lasts 1 minute. Kind of annoying and clunky to use if you're not playing as Unholy, in my opinion, but again, because of things that it leads to, we're going to pick it up on every specialization. That gets us into the second realm. So starting here with Runic Attenuation. So this makes your auto attacks have a chance to generate runic power. So we use runic power, and we also use different types of runes as resources on our Death Knight. So this runic power generation is nice because we can use it on our runic spenders. It's just a solid one to pick up. And again, because of what it leads into, we're going to pick this up on every specialization. Next, we have Improved Death Strike. This reduces the cost of Death Strike by 5 and increases the healing. Solid. Again, because of what it leads to, we're going to pick it up on every specialization. Then we have Cleaving Strikes. So this makes it so that your Heart Strike hits up to 3 additional enemies while you're in your Death and Decay, and you gain the bonus effects of Death and Decay for 4 seconds afterwards when you leave. Now, if you are playing as Frost, that's going to be your Obliterate that hits up to 2 additional targets. And if you are playing Unholy, it's going to be your Scourge Strike. Now, this is why we picked up Raised Dead, so that we can get Cleaving Strikes. This is just a really good talent to have in open world content, because you're pretty much always going to be facing 2, 3, or more enemies at the same time, and being able to drop down that Death and Decay and have one of your primary abilities cleave into multiple targets is just huge. So that's why we grabbed Raised Dead, is because we wanted to get into Cleaving Strikes. Okay, moving on to the next row. This is the reason why we went into Icebound Fortitude. It's to get Mind Freeze. Mind Freeze, to me, is mandatory on every single specialization. It is your interrupt spell. So this is a 15-second cooldown that will interrupt a spell from being cast. So we're going to get that on every single specialization. Next, we have Blinding Sleet. This is a minute cooldown ability that disorients targets, makes them wander around, and when it ends, those targets are slowed. This is one you can take or leave. Generally, I would skip this one. It's an additional crowd control if you feel like you need that. Then we have Anti-Magic Barrier. This reduces the cooldown of Anti-Magic Shell by 20 seconds and increases its duration and amount absorbed by 40%. Personally, I don't find much use for Anti-Magic Shell in open world content, so I couldn't see myself picking this up unless maybe I was fighting like a specific boss in a delve or something like that. We'll have to wait and see, but for now, this is a pretty easy skip just on the premise of what it is. The next one here is going to be March of Darkness. So this is the reason that we took Death Strike, is to get to March of Darkness. This makes Death's Advance grant an additional 25% movement speed over the first 3 seconds. Death's Advance is one of the only movement abilities we have as a Death Knight, and improving that in any way we can is huge. So we're going through all these talents to pick this one up to get that additional movement speed, because outside of these abilities, the Death Knight is slow. It is one of the slowest classes in the game. So we're going to grab that mandatory every specialization, in my opinion, just to go a little bit faster. Next, we have Unholy Ground. You gain 5% haste while you remain within your Death and Decay. You should pretty much always be in your Death and Decay, so you can just read this as gain 5% haste, which is great. I would take this on every single specialization. Next, we have Control Undead. This dominates an undead creature up to level whatever, based on your level, forcing it to do your bidding for 5 minutes. This is an okay ability if you're in an area with a bunch of undead and you just want to have an extra, body out there. You could totally skip this. If you like the playstyle and you're in the area, you could pick it up, maybe spec into this and then spec out of it when you move on. Next, we have a choice node. We can choose Enfeeble. Your ghoul's attacks have a chance to apply Enfeeble, reducing enemy movement speed and the damage they deal to you. And then Sacrificial Pact, where you sacrifice your ghoul to deal shadow damage to all nearby enemies and heal for 25% of your maximum health. Generally speaking, Enfeeble is okay to pick up on like Unholy if you want to, because you can kind of keep your ghoul out. Sacrificial Pact is okay to keep on Frost or Blood, because you can kind of summon your ghoul and then just sack it to deal AoE damage and heal you. But you don't have to pick this up on any of the specializations, so this really just comes down to your own personal preference. Moving to the next row, we have Cold Thirst. When you interrupt an enemy with your Mind Freeze, you gain 10 runic power and you reduce the cooldown by 3. Very solid pickup. You don't have to get this, but there's a lot of points available in the Death Knight class tree, as far as I'm concerned. So I like to put one in here that, runic power generation, you're going to interrupt casts on probably 50%, if not more, of the enemies that you fight. So that's just some extra runic power generation there for you. Next, we have Proliferating Chill. Chains of Ice will affect 1 additional nearby enemy. If you are using Chains of Ice as part of your build, this can be really good for Frost Death Knight. So potentially based on your build, you might want to pick this up. Chains of Ice in general is just an okay ability that you may or may not want to use. So whether you're heavily invested in that or not is kind of up to you as to whether or not you pick this up. I don't think it's mandatory, but I don't think it's terrible either. Then we have Permafrost. Your auto attack damage grants you an absorb shield equal to 40% of the damage dealt. Now for this one here, I like to have this especially on dual wield, so like dual wield Frost potentially. It's also pretty nice on Unholy as well. It's not really necessary on Blood. Blood has a lot of tankiness and survivability as well, but I would say for Frost and Unholy, I would definitely pick this up. For Blood, you could still pick it up. It's not like it's going to be a bad thing, but you just don't need it quite as much as you do with the other specializations. Next, we have Veteran of the Third War. This just increases your stamina by 20%. I believe, let's see, 20% for all specializations. That's, to me, a mandatory pickup. That is a huge stat boost to your health, which is super important. Regardless of what class you're playing on, you're going to be taking damage, and so having more health is just good. Next, we have Death Pact. So this is another defensive on a 2-minute cooldown. It will heal you for 50% of your maximum health, but it will also absorb any incoming healing equal to 30% of your max health for 15 seconds. So basically what it'll do is it will give you a big heal, but then if you are continuing to get healing through other effects, it will reduce the healing that you gained through for that. That being said, this is one of my preferred defensive abilities to pick up on the Death Knight class talent tree if you're going to get one, because it is basically just a 50% healing potion you can use every 2 minutes. That's right on the cusp of being kind of almost too long of a cooldown. It's good right there, especially on Frost and Unholy. I would pick this up on blood. It's kind of up to you. If you want to use that point for something a little bit more offensive or damage oriented, you definitely can. So this one is kind of a toss up. You can pass it, but I would definitely pick it up on Frost and Unholy for sure. And it's fine on Blood Death Knight too. Next, we have Brittle. Your diseases have a chance to weaken your enemy, causing your attacks against them to deal increased damage. All of the specializations have some sort of disease that they put onto the enemy, and so this has that chance to just give you 6% increased damage. Very, very nice ability here. To me, it's a pickup on every single specialization. And then we have Death's Reach. So this increases the range of your Death Grip by 10 yards and makes it so that if you kill an enemy that yields experience or honor, it will reset the cooldown of Death Grip. This one to me is a really good pickup to have. You can go without it, but I don't really recommend it. So I would pick this one up because the reset is nice, the increased range is nice, and when you're in open world content, you're just going to be doing a lot of this stuff, just grabbing someone, grabbing the next one, grabbing the next one. It's really nice to have that utility available to you. All right, on our next row, we have Icy Talons. Your runic power spending abilities increase your melee attack speed by 6% for 10 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. Really nice. So whether or not you pick this up just depends on whether you want things in the following location here. I think that this is basically a mandatory for all specializations because it leads to Asphyxiate, which we do want to pick up. And because this next talent here, Anti-Magic Zone, which is a 2-minute cooldown that places a anti-magic zone to reduce spell damage to party and raid members, to me is not worth picking up for open world content. So instead of picking this up, I would pick up Icy Talons. And then the last thing on this row is Unholy Bond, which is going to increase the effectiveness of your Runeforge effects by 20%. To me, this is a mandatory pickup, not necessarily because of the effect. The effect is nice, and you should have a nice Runeforge effect on your weapons at all times, but because it leads into Wraith Walk, which we are going to want to pick up. So moving on to our next row, on the left here, we've got Ice Prison. Chains of Ice now roots enemies for 4 seconds, but its cooldown is increased. To me, this is an easy skip for all specializations, unless you're building into a Chains of Ice specific build with something like Frost DK. Next, we have Gloom Ward. Absorbs are 15% more effective on you. Again, this is an easy pass for me as well. Not really necessary for open world content, but it doesn't hurt to put a point into this if you've got points to spare. Next, we have Asphyxiate. This to me is a must-have for every single specialization. It's a 45-second cooldown, 5-second stun. So longer than the typical stun, which is usually about 4 seconds. A nice 45-second cooldown. This is just really good as an additional interrupt, which we don't necessarily need because we have Mind Freeze with some reduced cooldown here, but it is just nice to get that full stun going. Really good to use on elites, rare spawns, things like that. So I really, really like this one. Then we have Assimilation. This increases the amount absorbed by Anti-Magic Zone and reduces the cooldown. Again, we're not picking up Anti-Magic Zone, so easy skip. Then we have Wraith Walk. So this is the other movement ability that we can pick up. And for me, that makes this a mandatory pickup. It's a 1-minute cooldown. It removes all root effects and increases your movement speed by 70% for 4 seconds. Okay. Very good to have, so you can alternate between this and Death's Advance to get around. Next, we have Grip of the Dead. This reduces the movement speed of enemies within the area of death and decay. I'm not worried about this at all in open world content. It's not really an issue, so this is an easy skip for me. Next, we have Soul Reaper. Soul Reaper I like to have on every single specialization. It's essentially an execute ability. It's an instant cast ability with a 6-second cooldown that hits an enemy and then puts a debuff on them called Soul Reaper. After 5 seconds, if the target's below 35% health, the rune will explode, dealing a bunch of damage. And if it kills the target while they're afflicted by Soul Reaper, you'll gain Runic Corruption, and also Soul Reaper will be usable for you again. So just really nice. Basically what you'll do is you'll get an enemy down pretty low, then you'll apply Soul Reaper to them so that hopefully when Soul Reaper explodes, it ends up killing off the target. It's a nice source of damage, especially for Blood Death Knight. You could pass on this for Frost and Unholy if you already have enough active abilities and you're not worried about, killing that enemy right there at the end. But especially for Blood Death Knight, it's a nice additional source of damage. On our next row, we have Suppression. Damage taken from area of effects attacks is reduced by 3%. When you suffer loss of control effects, the bonus is increased by 6% for 6 seconds. Not a big deal. I'm not too worried about this at all. It's an easy skip unless you want to get to one of the other abilities here. In the middle, we have Blood Scent. This increases your leech. To me, this is a really solid pickup for every single specialization to help get you down into the lower portion of the tree. Leech is just going to help to heal you back up in general. And then we have Unholy Endurance. This increases Lichborn duration by 2 seconds, while active, your damage taken is reduced by 15%. Lichborn is another defensive ability that we have that honestly, take it or leave it. You could skip this as well. So it just depends on you whether or not you want to get into some of the other talents that are on this next row. Moving to that next row, our first thing is Osmosis. Anti-Magic Shell increases healing receipt by 15%. Easy pass. So for me, you can absolutely pass on Suppression as well. Because you've got other ways to get to Insidious Chill if you need to. Insidious Chill makes it so that your auto attacks reduce the target's auto attack speed by 5% for 30 seconds, stacking up to 4 times. I do really like this. This is some nice damage mitigation against enemies that are going to be attacking you in melee. You can pass on this one, but it's a decent place to put a point if you have one to spend. Next, we have Runic Protection. Your chance to be critically struck is reduced by 3%, and your armor is increased by 6%. Easy pickup, all specializations for me, just because of the 6% armor, but the reduced chance to be critically struck is nice as well. And then we have Blood Draw. When you fall below 30% health, you drain health from nearby enemies. The damage you take is reduced by 10%, and your Death Strike cost is reduced by 5 for 8 seconds. Okay, just want to make sure, yep, that's the same. So this one, it just depends. Blood Death Knight, you should never be getting to below 30% health. Frost and Unholy, depending on your build and how much stuff you pulled, that is a possibility, so it's nice to have a little backup here. So I would say optional on Frost and Unholy, not really needed on Blood DK, but I mean, it doesn't hurt to have either, but you could do something else with that talent point potentially. Our next row has Rune Mastery. Consuming a rune has a chance to increase your strength by 3% for 8 seconds. I really like this. Any increase in strength is an increase in damage, and we can pump 2 points into this. So that would make me pick up Insidious Chill and put 2 points into this for a potential 6% increase in strength from that. In the middle, when you pull an enemy, the damage they deal to you is reduced by 6%. This is kind of whatever, it's fine. We don't necessarily need the damage reduction, but it does lead into Abomination Limb, so I consider that mandatory for all Death Knights, just to pick up that ability. And then we have Will of the Necropolis. Damage taken below 30% health is reduced by 35%. Again, this is a really nice one if your health is continuously getting low. Maybe if you're playing one of the more aggressive DPS builds or something like that. Or if you are just tanking below your item level or something like that. But definitely not a mandatory pickup for any of the specializations. I would say, on like Blood DK, if you're tanking in dungeons and stuff like that, I would pick this up. But, for open world content, you're probably okay. And our final row, we have Null Magic. Magic damage taken is reduced by 8%, and the duration of harmful magic effects against you are reduced by 35%. This in general is just a nice talent to pick up. If you have the points, you could throw one in here. It just reduces all magic damage taken by 8%, which is just kind of universally valuable, so that's fine. But you could also pass on this if you feel like you're tanky enough or have enough sustain. Then we have Unyielding Will. Anti-Magic Shell's cooldown is reduced, and it removes harmful magic effects. Again, not an ability that I find a lot of use for in open world content, so easy skip for me. Next, we have Abomination Limb. To me, this is just a mandatory pickup for Blood Death Knight, especially, but Frost and Unholy, it's a nice ability to have. 2-minute cooldown, you sprout a limb, dealing shadow damage over 12 seconds to all nearby enemies. Every 1 second, you pull an enemy to your location if they're further than 8 yards from you. So just really nice additional offensive ability to click on there when you get the chance. Also, kind of a weird version of CC as well. So just in general, a nice ability. I wouldn't say it's mandatory, but there's not a lot of other things that I'd rather spend the point on. Next, we have Death's Echo, Death's Advance, Death and Decay, and Death Grip have 1 additional charge. To me, this is a mandatory point for all specializations because it gives you a 2nd charge of Death's Advance. The charges for the other abilities are great, but 2nd charge of Death's Advance combined with your Wraith Walk gives you way more movement abilities. And then finally, Vestigial Shell. Casting Anti-Magic Shell grants 2 nearby allies a lesser Anti-Magic Shell that absorbs magic damage and reduces the duration of harmful effects against them by 50%. Again, not using this ability a lot. Easy skip for me here. So going down the tree this way, that puts us with about 2 points left here on the blood side of the tree. I'm sure we could find places to fill those in. But in general, that's my opinion on the Death Knight class talent tree. Just kind of from a generalist point of view, things that you pick up here may definitely change based on the build that you're playing or the content or the specific enemies that you're fighting. But for open world use, that's my opinion. Hopefully this has been helpful for you. If you liked the video, hit the like button, subscribe and support the channel, and share this video with a friend that you think is going to be playing Death Knight in the War Within. I appreciate you taking time to watch one of my videos, and I'll see you on the next one.